Wow, you have to clap louder than that because you are so few. We had a little competition tonight, and I'm so glad that you folks are here because this House race is very important. Our 2 seats are critical to getting funding, to forming policy, and it affects us in Central Oregon deeply. And so I appreciate you being here tonight. Before we get started, I would like to do a couple of things. I would like to introduce the panel of moderators and also introduce one by one our candidates tonight. So this is Aaron Switzer. He is with Source Weekly. And Curtis Vogel, he's with Central Oregon Daily and Zolo Media. I also want to thank our sponsors tonight, Miller Lumber and also Sunwest Builders. They have sponsored the whole series for us, and we really appreciate their stewardship. And also a call out to all of our media partners and to 10 Barrel Brewing for the space. So thanks for coming tonight. So our candidates are Sherry Helt, Eileen Keeley, and Jack Zika for House Seats 53 and 54. We're going to be asking them a series of questions tonight, and then we're going to do something a little bit different. Because it's a little lopsided up here for the 2 seats that they're running for, what we wanted to do tonight is have a little interaction with the audience in a different way. And we're going to be asking you to go onto a website and text, but not till a little bit later. So how it's going to go tonight is we have a 60-second introduction. Each candidate's going to tell you a little bit about themselves, why they're running, what their platform is. And then we're going to go to Aaron and Curtis and I for a back and forth Q&A. We've got some prepared questions. When that's done, we're going to do a little interaction with you folks on the website. We'll give you a text number. It'll be fun. You'll like it. And it'll be able to generate a little bit more conversation. When we're done with that, at the end is your time to keep that question that you want to ask and go ahead and ask the candidates. You'll have some time at the end to do that. So we should wrap everything up on or before 7 o'clock, and I guess that's it. I think we should probably get going. Did I leave anything out, gentlemen? Okay. So Aaron, you have, well, nope, I skipped it already. We're going to go ahead and start, and this is the part I left out. We're going to start on this end with Sherry Helt, and then we're going to Eileen, and then we'll go to Jack for your 60-second introduction. Thank you. And you don't have to push buttons. It'll turn on automatically for you.
Thank you so much for having me here tonight, Katie, Aaron, and Curtis. I appreciate you putting on this forum so that I can reach the voters. Thank you very much. It's nice to see so many friendly faces in the room. I am Sherry Helt, and I'm running for House District 54 for one very important reason, to improve the quality of education in the state of Oregon. I've been very honored the last 8 years to sit on the Ben Lapine Schools Board, and we've done a lot of work, a lot of hard work. We've moved graduation rates up by 10%. We've put secure vestibules in all of our schools in the next 18 months, and this work is very important, but however, it's not enough. And so this is deeply personal for me. I have 3 students in our public schools, as well as I have a business in 2 businesses in Bend, and I want to make sure that we thrive as a community, and I want to be Bend's next independent and inclusive representative. Thank you.
My name is Eileen Keeley. Central Oregonians want health care, good roads, good schools, and a place to live. And Oregon needs legislators who can provide those services at a cost we can afford and spread those costs fairly. When I was promoted to management for Daimler, I worked with an executive coach, and I learned 2 important lessons. The first is don't escalate. Solve your problems with your peers. If you escalate, you create drama instead of solutions. And the second is to seek out diversity. If you work with people who disagree with you, you find the holes in your argument and you get to a better solution. We need legislators who understand both of those lessons. And we need legislators with experience defining complex financial problems and resolving conflicts that comes with managing a $1 billion budget. I have that experience, and I ask for your vote.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jack Zeke. I'm running for State Representative for House District 53. I just wanted to clarify one more time that Eileen and I are running for 53 and Sherry's running for 54, so these are separate races. We're not all running together. So I am a husband, father of 2 kids. I'm on the Planning Commission for the City of Redmond, where I've proven myself to be pro-development by approving over 6 master plans to help develop Redmond. We have more people now going to Redmond from Bend to work than we did have from Redmond to Bend, so our mayor likes to call Bend our bedroom community. But I'm also on the Neighborhood Revitalization Committee, so we prioritize what our neighborhoods need and make them more accessible and safe. As well as that, I am also a realtor, and I'm on the board of directors for the Oregon Association of Realtors, where I've advocated for you in Salem already, trying to protect your mortgage interest tax deduction and for affordable housing. So I've advocated locally and the state level. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start this question with Eileen. The public employee retirement system has been described as a fiscal cliff for Oregon. How do you balance the commitment the state has made to public employees against the current shortfalls in other areas of the budgets like schools that this budgetary shortfall is affecting?
In 1975, Tom McCall and the legislature mortgaged Oregon's future to balance the budget, and we call that mortgage PERS. In 2003, Tim Knopp led the legislature in some significant reforms which reduced our long-term liability, and it ended the excessive payments. But it did nothing to pay off the debt that we had already incurred from 75 to 2003. So we are using, they expected the market to pay off the increases, and it did until 2008, and then it didn't. So we have been, additional cuts to PERS program, the 2003 program, will help us with future liability, but it doesn't pay off the debt right now. The way we're paying that debt is in increased class sizes, lower graduation rates, traffic, and inability to hire first responders. So we are already making the cuts that we need to make, but without increasing revenue, we will keep cutting the vital services that we're looking for. So my opponent will say that we can cut our way out of this, but money works in the real world, and those of us who have paid off credit card or student debt know that it takes both spending control and cuts. And additional revenue. Thank you.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
No. Okay. So unlike my opponent, I do not think we need to raise taxes. I believe that we have more revenue now coming to the state than we've ever had. And our economy is growing. That's how we're growing the revenue. We do not need to tax more to do this. There are cuts that can be made to the PERS program. We can go forward with a 401k employee contribution plan. We can't go backwards, which is fine because we don't want to mess with other people's retirements. That's how they've planned. We don't want to go backwards, and the courts have said that. But we can also lower the cap. Newt Bueller has talked about lowering it to 100,000. I think we can do that, so on the top earners. We can also stop spiking, which is where somebody in the last couple of years, when they average your payments, they'll actually use overtime and other methods to increase their salary so they get a higher payment into their retirement. We can fix that legislatively. And you can also take off part-time workers. So at like the Parks and Rec, you have teenagers, a lot of them that are working as lifeguards or in the parks doing things like that. But once you get to a certain amount of hours, you have to start to contribute into PERS. So if you were to take these people off, then that would save a bunch of money. I'm not saying taking all part-timers off, because some part-timers are using that for their main source of income, but there are quite a few that you can fix.
Do you need me to repeat?
Nope, I think I'm good, Aaron. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
PERS is a real problem. And we have a $25 billion unfunded actuarial liability. That means if we took every dollar that the state takes in for the next 2.5 years and spent nothing, that's how much it would cost. It's something that we have to have the courage to fix because it's a real problem. It affects our classrooms, it affects our counties, our mental health services, our roads. And we also have people that are counting on this system for retirement. It's really important that we make sure we uphold our end of the bargain. We have to make a sustainable system. And it was very clear with the Morrow decision that we can make changes moving forward. And so we have to have the courage to make the changes that can be made. And we have to look at it in smaller bites. I sat on the PERS Legislative Advisory Committee for 4 years. And on that time on the Legislative Advisory Committee, I heard numerous times, that's only $200 million. That's not enough. We need $1 billion. It's only $200 million. It's not enough. We need $1 billion change. I think we take some of those $200 million changes and they add up to $1 billion and we get real reform. We need to make sure we make changes going forward, that we listen to our courts, and we have the courage to make the changes to make sure our cities, our counties, and our classrooms have the dollars that they need to succeed.
Thank you, Sherry. Jack, we'll start this question with you. Depending on whether you are measuring overall corporate income tax structure or the top marginal corporate income tax rate, Oregon ranks anywhere from 37th to the 18th highest corporate tax rate in the nation, and there have been several measures and legislation aimed at raising those rates or reducing tax breaks in the last few years. Given the budget needs in the coming years, do you think the state needs more revenue from business taxes, or do you think businesses already pay their fair share?
I think businesses already pay their fair share. You don't want to go around raising business taxes. You don't want to burden businesses with regulation and taxes. We're already burdening them enough, and then you also want to stack it with cap and trade that they're talking about next year as well. So if you start adding that, and then it's going to cost everything from transit, anything that gets shipped here. So then we pay more for goods. They're going to have to lay off, or they're just going to move to Idaho and take their business elsewhere. And then how do you attract new business here when you have higher taxes? You don't. They're going to go to Idaho, or they're going to go to Texas. So the corporate tax is the 20th in the nation, but that does not count all the rest of the fees that they pay. You know, they have a franchise tax on their holdings. If you're a transit, you have a per mile tax. You have the unemployment insurance. You have 401k. You have workers' comp insurance. So there's a lot of other fees. I mean, as a realtor myself, I pay fees to the association. I pay fees to the state to have my license. So we're already burdening businesses enough. So no more.
Thank you, Jack. Sherry?
Can you repeat the question for me, Curtis?
Yeah, sure. Depending on which stats you measure, we're anywhere from 37th to 18th in corporate tax rates. But with all the budget needs happening, do we think you need more revenue from businesses via taxes, or do you think that businesses pay their fair share already?
So corporate tax rates are hard to quantify in Oregon because as a corporation, we pay our taxes through our personal tax. And so we have a very strong personal tax structure in Oregon, and we have to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples when we look at those statistics, first off. Secondly, I think we have more revenue income than we've ever had in the history of the state of Oregon, and we have to look at how we balance our budgets first with what we have, and look at what we can do to reform some of the revenue that's going out. I think we need to look at healthcare costs. They're expensive for everybody in this room, as well as every employer. And we also need to look at what we can do for revenue reform before we look at adding taxes. So I think we clearly need to look at our income that's higher than it's ever been, and we also need to look at reforming what we're spending our money on and how we can get better care and better outcomes for less money in the healthcare arena.
Thank you, Sherry. Eileen?
We have to look at corporate taxes in our overall tax structure, which is neither smart nor fair. We have a hodgepodge of legislation and initiative petitions and special use taxes, so that we are currently balancing the budget on our individuals and small companies to the tune of collecting 11 times as much in income as we do from corporations. So in April, the Oregon Business Plan published an editorial based on their strategic plan, and they called for tax reforms to reduce our volatility and to improve our services as a state. And these are the business leaders of Oregon. They called for increasing business taxes. So we're in the mid-range nationally when you look at just the corporate tax rate. But when you look at property tax breaks and you look at no sales tax, then that's where we come out near the bottom and significantly lower than California and Washington, our neighbors, even lower than Idaho. So Oregon is attractive to business because we're here. People want to live here, and customers want to live here. So we need to charge a fair rate to provide the services that both individuals and businesses want, which is schools, roads, and healthcare.
Great, thank you. Ms. Kylie, I am so sorry. I mispronounced your name. I said Keeley, and it's Kylie.
Thank you.
My apologies. So, Sherry Helt, you are first up for my question, and it's regarding housing. So there's currently discussions leading up to the 2019 session on affordable housing or low-income housing, and also workforce housing. That's just moderate income housing. So some of this discussion may also include a provision for rent controlling. And so what do you, how do you see this legislation progressing? What's your opinion on that?
So let me clarify, you want housing and you're asking about rent control?
Yes, as part of the low-income housing proposal.
So I have not seen an area where rent control works. I don't believe it is a viable solution. It would be nice if we had a real quick, easy fix to fix our housing crisis. I do believe we have a real housing crisis. I am always short-staffed. I could always hire more people personally in my own business. And I think it's really important that we work together as a community and solve our affordable housing crisis. I can tell you what I've done as a leader on the school board is you wouldn't think affordable housing and school board go together, but when we see a need in our community, as a board, we've stepped up. We were asked to take off a for-profit company, Pacific Crest, off of the tax rolls of the school board, of the schools, to qualify them for grants for affordable housing. And we did that. And let me tell you, when you have budgets that are being cut, it's a really hard decision. But we all did that, and we worked together, and the affordable housing is being built in Northwest Crossing, and it's going to open up relatively soon at $393 a month. We also have sold off surplus land as a school board to Housing Works, and they've put in 54 affordable townhomes. So I think championing affordable housing is something that I have done as a school board member and will continue to do as a legislator.
Do you need me to repeat the question, or are you good?
I think I got it.
I don't know what
I don't know what
noise
that
is.
sound is, though. Oh, okay. Something came, it's like something's landing. All right. All right. So, like all market issues, this is supply and demand. We have much more demand for housing in Central Oregon than we have available supply. So, before we start spending a lot of money and changing state law, what we should do is what the state is doing, which is creating pilot programs so that we can try out solutions that work. There are a lot of bottlenecks. Oops. Does that work? Have we lost all of them?
Test.
I'll pass that over.
Do we have it?
Thank you.
Okay, let's give her a little extra time for that.
Okay. So there are a lot of potential bottlenecks to housing. So there's labor, there's permits, there's transportation, and very importantly, there's local tax revenue. So my opponent thinks that the urban growth boundary is the only bottleneck that we have to deal with. And it's interesting to note that Boise and Seattle do not have urban growth boundary issues, and yet they have the same problems that we do. It's about supply and demand. Even if we had unlimited land, we don't have the local taxes to pay for the development cost of roads, sewers, and sidewalks of unlimited development. So I believe that local government needs freedom to decide their own zoning issues and decide their own rent policy, and to decide not to spend their tax dollars investing in unlimited growth. We do need state and federal money to help with affordable projects and with transportation, and that would be my job as your legislator. I want to go to Salem, and I want to fight for our fair share of those dollars. Thank you.
Okay, so the first part was rent control. I'm against rent control, by the way. It's a mechanism that hurts cities. You lose quality and quantity of rentals. If you start taking away property rights from people, or you start telling them what they can charge for rent, people are just going to give up and they're just going to sell. And so you're going to lose rentals, and then all of a sudden the rents are going to go up organically that way then. So it's a bad policy. I do think that we can fix our affordable housing. Housing is something I'm very passionate about because I deal with it all the time as a realtor and on the planning commission. So, and a lot of our frustrations come through with our land use laws. We're up against the state and density requirements and all kinds of different things that we have to deal with at the state level. If we had more regional control of our land use laws, then we could grow how we see fit, because our one-size-fits-all land use system isn't working. So Portland is not the same as Bend, and we're not the same as John Day. We all have different needs. So if we could have regional control, open up the housing, open up the supply to meet the demand, that would help out. An example, I think what she thought with the one bottleneck was my example that I give is the recent UGB expansion that Ben did. It took 10 years and about $1 million. That's ridiculous. That's time and money that could have been better spent on roads and sewer that we desperately need here in Bend. The other thing that we need are subcontractors. Subcontractors, the prices have doubled since the recession, and it's because they're retiring and they're not training their new help. So measure 97 or 98, fully fund that. That would help out. I'm time's up, and I can talk about it for more afterward if you want. I can go on forever.
Should we check our mics? Okay, we're good now. Thank you.
Eileen, I believe this question will start with you. Bend lacks developable residential, commercial, and industrial properties. There are plans to add inventory in certain areas, but infrastructure costs prohibit development without funding assistance. How do you propose to develop funding for infrastructure in Central Oregon at the legislative level?
At the legislative level, it all starts with the budget, doesn't it? So our funding will actually probably come from special use fees, not the general fund. So we'll be looking at two issues, one of which, you didn't mention this, but I think transportation is a huge issue, because where Bend cannot expand, or where people want more or less density than they can get in Bend, they're moving out to Redmond and Lapine and Terrebonne. And we don't have a transportation system that actually will allow people to, for example, own a single car in a two worker family in Lapine and use public transportation to get to Bend. And conversely, we also have the traffic congestion, particularly between Redmond and Bend. So transportation money is one of the big issues that I would go after. Affordable housing, I think the first thing that we need to do is pass Measure 102, which will actually help the local governments raise money for these kind of projects. And then we can ask for matching funds in addition to that.
Jack, you want me to repeat the question?
Please.
Bend lacks developable residential, commercial, and industrial properties. There are plans to add inventory in certain areas, but infrastructure costs prohibit development without funding assistance. How do you propose to develop funding for infrastructure in Central Oregon at the legislative level?
So there's funding for projects can get a little dicey because you don't want to go over to a certain level, because then you have prevailing wage, which then makes things cost even more. So you want to partner with the county and make sure the land comes in cheaper, so you can drive down costs like that. And you want developers, when they go in, to be able to develop the neighborhoods and the roads, so the city has a small portion of it. We're seeing this now in the costs of how much it is to put in the sewer lines down in the southeast. So this is something that has to be done ahead of time, so we're not creating a problem 20 years down the road. As of 102, that's some ballot measure, isn't it, that cities get the ability to tax for affordable housing. What an awful idea. If you tax people to make affordable housing, you're creating unaffordable housing for everybody that's paying that tax. So that is a horrible idea. I don't know why anybody would support that, but that's my personal opinion, sorry.
Sherry?
Can you give it to me one more time, Aaron?
If
Sorry.
I can pronounce deplorable or developable 3 times. Bend lacks developable residential, commercial, and industrial properties. There are plans to add inventory in certain areas, but infrastructure costs prohibit development without funding assistance. How do you propose to develop funding for infrastructure in Central Oregon at the legislative level?
That was very well done, Aaron. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions inside that question, I think. One is referring to the UGB, our urban growth boundary, and developable land. We do have a supply and demand issue. Our urban growth boundary, I think, has served us very, very well in that it's made a beautiful downtown core that's a very iconic place for Bend, and I am proud to have a business in downtown. But our UGB is really needs some updating for the times now, and I think that we could look at regionalizing the UGB process to be able to bring in land for that supply and demand. Once we get the land in there, infrastructure costs. That's a real big deal, and that's something that I've managed on the school board. I'm in the process of building 2 more schools with oversight on a school board level. We've passed bonds, and we have passed some of the infrastructure costs inside of those bonds. We're putting in roundabouts outside of the schools. We're putting in sewers to the streets, and it's very important that you consider infrastructure costs when you're considering building. So I would work with the local officials as I have on the school board, because that's how we get stuff done, is we work together. And I would look to our local leaders. We have a mayor being elected. I would look to our local mayor to help me figure out what we need to do with those costs.
Thank you, Sherry. Jack, this question will be for you. As you know, Central Oregon has significant lands zoned for farm use. In recent sessions, there have been efforts to reclassify some of those lands that can't be farmed due to soil and other characteristics. Would you support rezoning these specific lands to accommodate future growth?
Absolutely. You have part of the land use system that they're protecting is EFU, which is exclusive farm use, and in the valley they measure soil within feet. And here in Central Oregon we measure it within probably like inch. So we're not growing anything on the east side of Bend. We're growing sage rock, or I'm sorry, lava rock and sagebrush over there. That's the only thing that's good for us. So it would be better used for development, and this is great land. You partner up with the counties, like in Redmond, we have what's called the Urban Area Reserve, and that is so we can quickly change land into developable land. It's kind of like a far out picture. So that's how you would get started. You would partner up with the county, you would be able to use these lands, and you would give them the ability to change EFU land into MUA, which is multiple use, or RR, which is residential.
Thank you, Jack. Sherry? Repeat the question, or?
Please, thanks,
Okay.
Curtis.
Yeah, sure. As you know, Central Oregon has significant land zoned for farm use. In recent sessions, there's been efforts to reclassify some of these lands that can't be farmed due to soil or other characteristics. Would you support rezoning those specific lands to accommodate future growth?
So I think we need to make those choices as a community. We need to work together, work with our county leaders and our city leaders, and determine where they would want to see lands rezoned. And I would support regionalizing the urban growth boundary so that we could work together as a community and find the spaces that we believe are the most developable and the most successful places to help our housing crisis. So that's what you can expect from me as your next legislator.
Thank you, Sherry. Eileen?
So Jack and I actually agree quite a bit on this. So whoever gets to go first uses all the good arguments. So we do agree. Our land use laws are based on the Willamette Valley, which is an amazing resource given to us by God and the Missoula floods. And also we like Tom McCall protecting all the beaches for us. But out here, we farm on dust over basalt lava flows, right? So it takes very large parcels and a lot of irrigation in order to make agriculture profitable. So Jack and I actually both support allowing those smaller EFU parcels, because we have a number of them that are 10 acres and even smaller. And a couple of things that we'd like to be able to see is, in fact, allowing ADUs, auxiliary dwelling units, to accommodate either multi-generation families or farmhands who are having difficulty getting housing here. So these are the kind of things that actually Jack and I agree on. I did want to take a minute, though, to correct Measure 102. That's actually not raising taxes. It's an amendment to our Constitution, because the Constitution prohibits sharing what we raise in a local bond with a profit or a nonprofit. And this is just allowing us to do that so that cities and counties can partner with businesses in order to build affordable housing.
Thank you. So Sherry, we're starting with you again, and my question is in regards to the cap and trade, cap and invest, green jobs. It's had several iterations. Last week during legislative days in Salem, both the Senate and the House leadership said that the cap and trade legislation was their priority for the 2019 session. So what is your opinion on the cap and trade legislation? How do you see that moving forward?
So first off, when we talk about this, I think we're asking the question, is there an environmental issue, right? Do we have climate change? I do believe that we have climate change. I'm not convinced this is the way we go about solving it. I'm very concerned. I've also talked a lot today about affordable housing and how that's an important cause that I would like to champion. I think that if we raise the cost of everyone's utilities and their fuel to get to and from their jobs, it raises the cost of living. And that very much concerns me in an area where we're experiencing high costs of living. So I'm not supportive of this measure as I've seen it written, but what I am supportive of, and I want to tell you what I have championed from an environmental standpoint from my own life and business. Pacific Power gives us the option to buy clean energy, and my husband and I have chose for the last 10 years to purchase clean energy for our business. And we've done that at an increased cost to our business. But it's something that we value as business owners and community members. And so I do support environmental causes. I just don't believe that this is the right one that fits for Central Oregon.
So pollution has a very high cost that we're already paying. And we're paying it in taxes for healthcare and for environmental cleanup. But we're also paying it in our shrinking water supply and in the smoky air we breathe from the increasing forest fires. So I worked for Daimler Trucks through 4 EPA changes, and I actually saw this in action. And my experience tells me that business is much better at controlling costs than government is. So cap and trade shifts costs from taxpayers to polluters by creating a market for carbon credits, and then invests that, or provides an investment fund for small businesses to make the cleanup so that they can stay competitive. And it's using free market tools, free market capitalism. We make a market in pollution. So because businesses will be more efficient in controlling the cost to prevent pollution than government will ever be in the cleanup. So overall, this reduces costs to taxpayers and consumers. Now, I know that California saw some issues with rate increases in electricity, but we're much further along than California was when they started this. We only have one coal-fired plant here in Portland, and that's scheduled to close in 2020. Here in Central Oregon, our power comes from hydro, and we're much further along in investing in solar and wind, so we won't see those same kind of spikes in our utilities.
Cap and trade. Oh, buddy. What a bad policy. I think you're probably starting to get what type of person I am here. I think bad policies hurt our economy and hurt our business. Cap and trade is a hidden sales tax. That's what it is. Everything that comes in by truck, train, airplane, the table, the chairs you're sitting on came here, it was delivered by somebody, that's going to be a tax. All of our manufacturers here in Oregon that manufacture produce carbon. If you charge them more, then all of a sudden they lose their competitive edge to out-of-state companies. What are they going to do? They have to lay off people, they have to reduce costs. So cap and trade is a bad idea that started in California, and when they implemented it, their utilities went up 120%. 120% overnight. So I'm not prepared to pay that much more in my utilities. It's a bad policy. If you want to talk about carbon, what we need to be talking about is our forest fires. There was more carbon released in that fire over the summer than all of our cars put together for 3 years. That's what we need to be looking at, and that's where we need to have our focus.
Thank you, Jack. We'll start this question with you, Eileen. After dodging a major funding bullet earlier this year, OSU Cascades is still pursuing a total of $28 million to help finance infrastructure to construct a campus innovation district and a new student success center. Additionally, COCC is asking for $8 million for a new academic building in Redmond. How will you support these projects even though there's less funding overall and more competition throughout the state's higher ed institutions for the same funds?
So this is the catch. 70% of Oregon's legislative budget is actually detailed into special uses. It's either federal money or it's special use taxes that we collect, and it can only be used for that special purpose. The legislature can't move it. So there's really only 30% of the budget that we can move and that we can adjust between several priorities. That's about $20 billion. 85% of it comes from individual taxes and 15% comes from corporate taxes. So in order to solve these problems without raising revenue, for Oregon OSU Cascades to win, somebody else has to lose. For K-12 to win, somebody else has to lose. So I do believe that it's time for us to ask corporations to help pay for our education. And as I mentioned before, the Oregon Business Plan specifically said that they supported raising business taxes, and the number one reason that they did that was for our education system, because they need educated workers in order to be profitable.
Thank you, Eileen. Jack, do you need the question again, or?
So I absolutely support OSU Cascades and their expansion. I got a great chance to go there and tour and meet Becky Johnson and see the master plan and see what they have in store. And the students actually voted on to increase their tuition by $50 to help build the Student Success Building. So students see the benefit, I see the benefit. Where the problem comes in is when they ask for money, since they are a new school and the site preparation costs so much because the land that they're sitting on, they lose points. The Higher Education Coordinating Commission is the one that makes the decisions on who gets the money. And they score every university that comes in. And they use a rubric, and that's their score, their point process. And right now, they take points off for the bad site. They don't give points for new construction. So there's things that we can change in that rubric and that committee to make these rewards instead of costing them points. So we can get expansions for OSUS Cascades. If you get a chance, go by, take a look at their master plan. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you, Jack. Sherry, you need the question again, or?
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
Thank you, though, Curtis. So OSU Cascades, it's amazing. I'm so proud that we have a four-year university here. I was on the school board before OSU Cascades campus was built, and I was a champion for OSU Cascades campus. I went to many conferences on a national level to see great school districts across our nation, and the thing that I walked away from noticing is that they all had four-year partners that were very close to them. If we're going to move education forward, we have to make sure that everyone has access to a four-year education. And we're in an area where a lot of people would not have access to that if we did not have OSU Cascades. So I think as a legislator, it's very important that I make sure my voice is heard loud and make sure that I advocate for Central Oregon and bring those funds back here. That's one of the things that I think is the job of a legislature who's elected to represent Bend, is make sure that we're advocating for us and our needs, and we need to expand our four-year campus because it gives educational opportunities to all of our kids, and it's a great business partner for our businesses, and it's one of the best investments we can make. So I will advocate loudly and proudly.
Jack, we're going to start this question with you. We have a workforce shortage in Central Oregon, and there are constantly efforts underway to develop the workforce pipeline and to train this workforce with support programs. What is the government's role in supporting these programs, and how do you find these funds?
One of the policies I was talking about was I'm fuzzy on the measure. It's either 97 or 98, but it was the college success measure that we all voted on, and it passed. And it also includes career technical education credits. It's not fully funded in the legislature. We can make sure that it gets fully funded, and then we can partner up with our high schools and COCC and create jobs that are subcontractors. So that's framers, electricians, plumbers, carpenters. These are great paying jobs. I've got a lot of neighbors that are next to me, and they make a lot more money than I do, and they're subcontractors. So this would help the economy. This would help everybody out, and also help make affordable housing too. So, bonus.
Do you want me to repeat?
Yes, please, Aaron.
We have a workforce shortage in Central Oregon. There are constantly efforts underway to develop the workforce pipeline and to retrain these workers through programs. What is the government's role in supporting these programs, and how would you find the funds to support them?
So as a school board member, I have been a champion of career and technical education programs. They're very important that we acknowledge all different types of learners. The way we increase our graduation rates is we make sure we have options that engage all of our students. And the best part about it is it translates into an educated workforce. So it's a win-win. And we are experiencing a lot of retirements and shortage in a lot of different workforce areas. And so in Ben Lapine, we have multiple programs in medical areas, in construction areas, in welding, and we need to support these programs and make sure that we're supporting programs that our businesses can support when they're done with school, or there's programs for at COCC to continue their training. My son went to a program at Bend High where he learned to weld, and he's now taking a welding program at COCC. So programs like this exist. We just need to expand them, make them more robust, and really make sure that our businesses are ready to receive and our community colleges are ready to train them and make sure they're a middle school through secondary school program that's seamless for our workforce.
Eileen,
One more time.
one more time.
Yeah.
We have a workforce shortage in Central Oregon. There are constantly efforts underway to develop the workforce pipeline and support programs to retrain. What is the government's role in supporting these programs, and how would you find these funds?
Thanks. So we actually have 3 different resources to help us with CTE. And I want to double down on what Sherry said. The Redmond School District identified 4 things that were most likely to predict someone's graduation from high school. And one of those was participation in CTE, because it gives students a way forward. So Measure 98 was to support CTE in our schools, and we're expanding in both Redmond and the Bend Lapine schools. But also in COCC, this is a really valuable program for us, and this is also an affordable alternative to college for a lot of our kids, because the Oregon Promise makes it essentially tuition free for the first 2 years, while they can either prep for something that they'll later take to a four-year college or learn a trade. There's a third option as well, and we need to help this, I think we need to help make the connection in our schools, and that's with our trade unions, because our trade unions have apprenticeship programs, and apprenticeship programs are a happening thing across the country. A kid can come out, graduate from high school, and make $17 an hour as an apprentice, and work through for his journeyman, and make over $40 an hour after 4 years. That's an affordable wage. I mean, that's a living wage job. And this is what we want to see for our kids coming up in Central Oregon.
Okay, thank you to each of you for this session of the evening. And what we're going to do with you now is a little bit different than what we've done in the past with these forums. And we're going to mix it up a little bit. So at the top of this screen, if you have a smartphone on you, could you please go to www.menti.com. If you need to get on the Wi-Fi here, hang on, it's something like "What's up, Buttercup?" What is it? It's "Drink Up, Buttercup," all one word, lowercase, and you look for the 10 Barrel Pub Wi-Fi signal. I am not kidding. So here's how this works. You go to the website, you find a place where it asks you to enter your code. Is everybody there? Menti.com. And the code today is 845333 hike. I'm just kidding. 845333. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask a couple of questions, and you text directly to that number, and it'll magically appear up on the screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to select, it'll be a word cloud, and we'll select the word that's largest. The larger the word, the more people have weighed in on that particular thing. So, has everybody got it? All right. So, in 1 to 3 words, what other topics should we ask about? It's not a word cloud, but it's close enough. Let's say we have 5 folks. Let's wait for a couple of more, see how this populates. Right? It's not forming the cloud, so I'm just going to pick them random. Oh, it's the next one. Okay. All right. So I'm going to look up here and find a couple of items that we haven't covered yet tonight. Let's go with the wildfire threatening neighborhoods. Let's take a minute on this. So 60-second reply, because I've heard a lot of talk around town about the issue with wildfire management, et cetera. So what would the state's role be in addressing wildfire management and cutting them down and protecting? Obviously, we live in a place that's directly adjacent to national forests and other combustibles, and a lot of them. We had a couple of summers to prove it. So, who started last? Was it Eileen? Was it you? Or no, it was Jack. So Sherry, we'll start with you. Do you want to give 60 seconds on wildfire management?
So again, wildfire management, I think, refers to climate change that is happening, and how do we manage that from a wildfire standpoint when we have all of our trees very close to our homes. It's very important that we work together. And in Deschutes County, we are extremely lucky to have the Deschutes Collaborative Forest effort, which is working very hard at balancing animal habitats versus clearing our forests. And on those committees, you have loggers and you have environmentalists, and they all work together and come to a median point and agree. And I think that's really amazing work, and it's also been acknowledged with a national award of collaboration. And so I think collaboration is the way that we work together to get this done and make a difference.
Eileen?
I live in Sun River, so this is an everyday concern for us. And we have a couple of issues. Obviously, we're talking about the federal forests, are what we're on the verge of. And so in that sense, we have to advocate with the U.S. Forest Service to get the thinning and the controlled burns done so that we can have that taken care of early in the season and deal with less smoke in August when we hate it. But one of the things that Sun River has done, and we can advocate for this more with other communities that are in the wildlife-urban interface, and that is training, educating homeowners about ladder fuels so that they can build a defensible space around their homes. And this is something that we learned from the Wenatchee fire, and Deschutes Collaborative brought an excellent presentation about that. So you can't force someone to clear out their area at this point, but we can educate homeowners how they can save their homes.
Okay, so the forest fires are going to be a big deal. Last summer, without the other statistic that I told you about our cars, but our air quality was worse than Shanghai. So that's pretty hard to believe. But we need active management of our forests, and that includes removing ladder fuel. So if you know what ladder fuel is, it's the dead trees, it's the brush that from a forest fire. These catch up and they're like matchsticks. They burn hot and they'll burn trees, they'll destroy the soil. So if these keep going, we're gonna lose our forests because the trees aren't gonna grow back. So this is something that we all enjoy, our forests and camping, but we need to protect our environment. There was an act or a legislation that was passed last session. I believe it was called the Good Neighbor Authority. And what it did is it gave the agencies, state, federal, the ability to communicate better with each other. So we need to have more programs like this. And also something I'd like to see again that we never hear about is called a sustainable harvest. We never hear that anymore. I think we've gone too far in one direction on our harvest where we're not doing anything at all. We need to get back in so we can thin the forests and talk about some more income for our schools. That's where it used to come from. It would be good to get that back.
Thank you. Thank you. So there are a lot of great topics up here, and thank you for participating. I'm going to ask one more because we have one more question. So hold these topics and ask them in the Q&A session that you're going to have here in a minute. So let's go ahead and have one more question up there. There was opioids. So we've heard a lot about this lately, and the state has some unique capability to address this issue. So I would like to ask your thoughts in 60 seconds on how the state can help address the opioid crisis. So Eileen, let's go with you first.
Again, with the pilot programs, the state of Oregon has authorized a couple of pilot programs to help figure out what's more effective. And as I said, I'm a believer in that because before we change laws and spend a lot of money, we should know what actually works. We do know that Oregon was problematic at first because we required all doctors to take training in opioids, but Oregon has also been taking an initiative, and we're actually bringing our rate down faster than a lot of other states are doing that. And so we're exploring alternative treatments like acupuncture for pain control, meditation, and interestingly enough, medical marijuana, which is more readily available in our state. So we're looking to these pilot programs to tell us what works and how we can invest and spread that out over a wider community.
Jack?
The opioid crisis has become a pretty bad deal. There's about 49,000 people that overdosed or died last year in the United States. So this is something that we're becoming really aware of. And I know a personal experience. So I chipped a tooth and I had to go to the dentist. I was in a lot of pain, and they gave me some ibuprofen. So, so I think dentists and doctors are getting it. They're not prescribing as much. They're not prescribing it as often. So I think we need to keep that up. But then also, as the state's concerned, we need to have access to pain management centers and wellness centers to get these people that are addicted off the drug.
Harry?
The addiction to opioids is a real crisis in the United States. We use more opioids than any other country in the world. And we need it affects our health outcomes, it drives our healthcare costs up, and we need to come up with solutions for that. And I think we need to work with the medical community to determine those and really get a little bit more aggressive on this. House Representative Greg Walden just passed a bipartisan legislation through Congress that is addressing this, and I think that when you see bipartisanship coming from national politics, which is really quite a mess at this moment, that's a real win, and we need to figure out how to continue that and support that in our state and drive down our healthcare costs and better outcomes up.
Thanks to each of you for allowing us to pick a couple of topics and experiment a little bit. So there's been a cloud brewing behind you as you've been answering these questions. So we've asked the audience what they think is most important, what the most important trait is if you're a legislative candidate. And so when you look at the word cloud, these are the top items that came up: integrity, experience, empathy. But you can see a lot of others there. And now we get to allow you to pick one of these traits and explain to us why it's the most important and what you bring to the legislature with that trait. And Jack, you get to go first on this one.
So I'll pick the one right in the middle there, experience. I have been advocating, like I said, for you in Salem for affordable housing and to keep the mortgage interest tax deduction. I've also been the planning commission where we're working to make neighborhoods, we're working to make affordable housing here locally, where we're trying to make neighborhoods more accessible, we're trying to make them more safe, we're trying to, also the committees I'm on, trying to make 97, where the traffic flows better, and helping businesses out so we can improve the economy. So I think I have the experience to take with me to Salem and bring a little bit of common sense. I see that one in there too, so I'm going to sneak that one in there. Some common sense to Salem and some Central Oregon values as well.
Katie, I have a clarifying question. Can I use the same word that Jack used?
Yes, you can.
Okay, I just didn't know if it was a one-time use word. I'm also going to choose experience. I have been elected 3 times by the voters of the Bend-Lapine community to the school board. And I have led, along with other school board members, the largest budget item in our state for 8 years and oversaw the spending and outcomes that are provided from those dollars. And so I bring that to the table, and I think that I have never taken that duty lightly. I show up, I work hard, and I am constantly looking for the unintended consequences when we're making policy. And I think that's something that we don't do very well as a government, and that's what I will bring to the table, is looking for those unintended consequences and making sure our policies meet the needs and the intentions that we want.
When I was in middle school, we moved to Chicago so that my dad could take his dream job, everything he always wanted. But unfortunately, a couple of years in, he turned his boss in for unethical behavior, and my dad was fired. A few months later, the company realized that my dad was telling him the truth, and they offered him a job, and my dad refused it. And he was out of work for about 18 months. As a result, my college fund actually supported us. And I ended up going to my third choice college because that's who gave me the free ride. But my dad got a new job, and it was a great job, and we moved, and it was a good life. And we all recovered from that. And what I learned from that is you can get another job, but you can't get new values. You can't get your integrity back if you let it go. So that's what I carry with me in my work. I would rather do a good job than be promoted. And would anybody like to take a guess? That company changed its name in the early 80s. Anybody want to guess what the company's name was? Enron.
Wow. Thank you very much. And now we're going to the portion of the evening where it's your floor. You get to ask the questions that are on your mind. Aaron and Curtis will be at opposite ends. And just so we could expedite this, if you have a question, it'd be great if you could just walk up to them and stand in line on either side of the room. Don't knock each other over getting there. And great. Aaron, it looks like you have the first question. 60 seconds each, and you can ask one of them, but each of them have the opportunity to answer the question.
Thank you. A state trifecta is when the governor, Senate, and House are all controlled by one party. Oregon's been a Democrat trifecta 10 of the last 12 years, with 2 exceptions being a split House in 11 and 12. We've heard about the things that need to be fixed this evening, but what are you going to do, assuming we have the same situation the next 2 years, to make sure we're not having the same conversation in 24 months?
I think that's for everybody.
Was that for all three? All three. Boy, can you remember what that was? You want to repeat it? Okay, trifecta. Go ahead.
I can do it if you want me to start, or do you want to start? Okay, so the House and the Senate are 1 vote away from a supermajority. So a supermajority for the Democrats. And so 1 more vote, and then they would have free ride to raise taxes. They'd have anything they want. They would only use the Republicans as a quorum. So I don't think either party should have a supermajority. I think that's too much power. I think it breeds corruption. And right now, we do have all 3 layers are Democrat. And speaking with Gene Wisnett, who is our rep now, he said, if you're going to pass the bill, you're going to have to get a Democrat co-sponsor. So the message was, at day 1, you have to go over and you have to walk across the aisle, you have to shake hands, and you have to get where you see eye to eye and pass good policy and bring important things back to Central Oregon, because I really think that we have been forgotten on this side of the mountains. A quote that they had over there was that they don't need a 4-year college over there. That's the mentality they have over in the valley. So we need to bring that back.
So in answer to your question, I'm running. That's what I'm doing. And I'm running because I am independent-minded and inclusive. And I step up and I work across the aisle. And I think that's what we're all begging for and asking of our elected leaders. And we don't see a lot of that. Unfortunately, our world is very polarized right now, and it does not service anyone well. I have been on the school board for 8 years, and I have had the honor and privilege of appointing 4 school board members during that time that I have voted for. 2 of them have been Republican, 2 of them have been Democrat. I not only can tell you that I'm bipartisan, but I can illustrate that in actual appointments. And that's what I want to bring to the state legislature, and that is why I'm running. And I want to be Ben's next independent and inclusive representative.
So I heard on the radio when I was coming in that we don't know what's going to happen in the governor's race. It's the closest race we've ever seen. But yes, we probably still will have a Democratic majority in the House. What I bring to the table is, if I'm elected, I will most likely be the only Democrat from this side of the mountains, which is going to give me an outsized voice in the legislature and with the Democratic caucus. We need to be heard on the other side, which means we need somebody who can get into the room and say, I understand your good intentions, but please understand that it's not the same on this side of the mountains. And that's what I plan to work on in the legislature.
Thank you. Curtis, you have the next question.
So my question involves tiny homes. There's a lot of jurisdictions that believe that tiny homes is the solution to affordable housing. This is currently being discussed at a state level as to how to regulate tiny homes, either as RVs, because they're movable, or as standalone under the building codes, which foundation, that type of thing. So my question to all 3 of you is, how would you see tiny homes be regulated?
Thanks, Karna, for that really difficult question. I think when we talk about affordable housing, we have to look at out-of-the-box solutions because we're frankly in a really difficult scenario. Housing rates are going up, they're very expensive, and we have a lot of populations that are not going to be able to afford houses. So what do we do to help them? And I've met with a gentleman that builds tiny homes, and I think that it's a solution that we should look at, but we have to make sure that we regulate it, make sure they're safe, and make sure that they fit the needs of our community. We need to work with our local leaders. It's really important that we work with our city councilors on issues like this, and make sure that it aligns with our city leadership values as well. And so as a leader, I would reach out to the rest of the community that would be directly in charge of this and work with them.
So in the winter, I also teach skiing at Mount Bachelor, and a lot of our instructors are housing challenged. And this is actually one of the solutions that several of them have come up with. They're building their own tiny house. In my view, I would consider it more like an RV. And in the summer, I'm an RVer as well. Because these tend to be in either RV parks, or we also potentially have the opportunity to allow them to be on whatever we rezone EFU to, so that this can be a temporary spot. It will never have the stability of a standalone house, and I think that we need to understand that we're going to have different code for the tiny houses. And I mean the ones that are on wheels, not ADUs that are built on a foundation. So that's my impression.
Okay, so for tiny homes, with the two designations, one being the mobile home, one being the foundation, you have different challenges for both. So we have cottage zoning in Redmond. They are smaller houses. They're 1,100 square foot, I think, and less. So, but what it comes down to is building costs. So if you have a mobile permit, then you can use smaller materials to build it. So the costs are lower, so you have a more affordable housing. But also, it's probably not going to last as long because you didn't use as good materials. So it really depends on where you're going to put it. So if you have zoned close to the city cottage zoning, then you probably want it to be on a foundation and you want it to be with better materials. But if it's going to be in a park, then it's going to be a mobile designation, cheaper materials to increase the affordability of the housing.
Right. Aaron, next question.
All right. Well, thank you for running for a job I never want. But one of the things, as I look across the panel there, is that none of you have served in the legislature in the state of Oregon. And we hear a lot about revenue increasing and stop spending. One of the things that we don't hold accountable is we have 100 to 150 agencies delivering services to the community that we live in, that being the state of Oregon. None of them are held accountable to how much they spend during the year. When they budget and ask for money from the legislature at the end of every year for the new year, nobody ever really looks at that. They're not held accountable for how well they deliver services. We're seeing that in some of the agencies like Child Services. So I'd like to know what your appetite and ability will be to have and change the discussion, because we have lots of revenues and we have ways to raise funds in the future. But what is your appetite and your ability to take on a discussion about these various agencies that aren't doing their job well, so that we can reallocate funds that they have in their rainy day funds to then improve the services being provided and to raise the ability to close the gap in our budget in terms of what we're spending and what we're raising?
You hit an interesting problem because we have a part-time legislature and full-time executive branch. So it's very difficult for the legislature to get that accountability that we expect. And I think one of the ways that we do that is that we hire people who have actually controlled budgets before. It is a difficult thing to go through a budget and to argue back and forth, but that was my job for 13 years with Daimler, and that's what I want to do. I think part of what we need to do is make sure that those agencies are held accountable to different committees within the legislature, or even that each legislator gets an agency or two, which they are absolutely responsible for that oversight, because oversight is key to using your money well.
Okay, so I think with the audits that Secretary of State Dennis Richardson has been doing, he's been doing an awesome job, right? So it seems like every week he's finding some sort of mismanagement of money. He found it was $70 million in the OHA, the Health Authority. So I think we should empower him to be able to do more audits. But however, I do think that we need to be careful because we need to allow some of these agencies to hold on money, because the legislation, they get grabby, they get sticky fingers, and they'll take money out of the savings. I have a quick story about this. I was talking with Neighbor Impact, and they had $10 million that they were holding on to because they were going to build 3 homeless shelters here in Central Oregon, and it would have been something that we really need. And the legislation took that money because they weren't using it. They just said, oh, well, you have the money, you're not using it, we can use it somewhere else. So now when they get money, they have to use it before the legislative session ends, and or else it'll be taken from them. So we need to allow these agencies to hold money so we can have outcome.
I think this is a great question. I think we need more accountability measures. I think we want to measure outcomes that we're asking. And I'm going to give an example because I only have 1 minute. Foster care. Thanks for asking a difficult question in a short amount of time. Foster care system. We have a foster care system that every one of the children that are in our foster care system have been failed by every single adult in their life. And they're now relying on our state to take care of them. And our foster care system is an absolute failure. And we need to be putting in accountability measures. We need to be investing in that system and making sure that we're taking care of those children and finding them fit homes. But we also need to make people accountable for taking care of them and measuring those outcomes. And I think that's very, very important that we measure outcomes of the systems that we're asking.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Curtis?
This question could be for everybody, but probably speaks more to Sherry's experience. But I think everyone would agree about the importance of our children in the future of the city and the country. And Ben seems to be facing a serious lack of infant and toddler childcare options, preschools and after childcare for grade age students. I have a lot of friends in Bend. Every person I know who has a young child or is currently pregnant is facing a lot of stress and anxiety over the lack of quality options. And everyone has to work. I don't know one family where one person can afford in Bend to stay home and take care of the kids. So as a legislator in Oregon, do you feel that there are avenues to explore to increase the quality and quantity of childcare options in Central Oregon?
Yes, so I think this is a great question. Thank you for asking it. I own restaurants. Try finding a daycare at night. So not only do I have trouble finding daycare for my kids when they were little, but so do all my coworkers. And we spend a lot of time working together to watch each other's kids. And so this is something that I deeply believe in. I think it's very important. I know that the chamber is heading up a panel and looking into what kind of options are possible and how we help the situation, because it's real. Last night I was at COCC. I was invited to talk about what we needed in a new president, and one of the students that was there as well, he said, we need, if you want to up enrollment, we need daycare options at our community college. I think it's really important. I think one of the things that makes it very ineffective and cost ineffective is the cost of rent. And so I think we should look at subsidizing and putting some grants in to bring down the cost of rent in our area for childcare providers.
So actually, Jack and I were talking about this just the other day. And he taught me something I didn't know, which was in the city of Redmond, there's a $7,000 permit fee to open up in-house daycare. In our district, a lot of that early childhood care is going to happen in the home. And part of that will happen because our workers are cobbling together 2 and 3 jobs, and they have very irregular schedules. So you can't find a drop-in daycare. So people are turning to their neighbors to provide that. And costs like that make it more difficult for it. So I was also very fortunate when my daughter was born that my employer had on-site daycare. This is something that I'd like to see incented because it's the easiest thing if you can drop your kid off as you're going into work and pick your kid up as you come out.
So this is something that I've been dealing with. I have two kids. I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, so I have personal experience with this. I have skin in the game, you could say. We had a very hard time trying to find daycare. We couldn't find like a place that has a dedicated daycare because they're on waiting lists, and it's in Bend, it's in Redmond. So we used a in-home childcare, so that's how we had to find it, but it was very difficult to find. But on the Planning Commission itself, I am spearheading an initiative to try to bring down the cost of the barrier of entry, and that the $7,000 she's talking about is a conditional use permit. And it's when you use a conditional use permit, it costs $7,000 for them to come in and look at it. And all zoning types, some of it, yes, you need, like in residential, you don't have a daycare next to a residence. But in a commercial zone or a multiple use zone, you should have an outright use for a daycare. This is something that I would really appreciate if maybe the chamber would come over to Redmond, or if the Redmond and help me out with it, because I have some daycares that are getting willing to testify, and the neighbor impact is helping me out with it too. But this is a very important issue, and this is something that we can do.
Thanks to each of you, and thanks for everyone who participated tonight. We are at the point in the evening where each candidate gives their closing remarks, 60 seconds. And we started with Sherry, so Eileen, I believe you go first because we're going through the circle. Thanks.
In my experience as a controller, I learned to define complex problems and work with my colleagues to find the best solution. This is a difficult and lengthy process. Tonight, we had 90 seconds to describe our solutions for the problems that have plagued Oregon for years. And there's no magic fix. Finding the best solution takes sustained effort, and it takes ideas that come from many sources, from me and from my colleagues and from you, the people of Central Oregon. We are a representative government, and I want you to know that your voice, your experience, and your values have power. My job as your legislator is to amplify your voice in Salem. We need legislators that know how to question the status quo, listen, learn, and speak up for the people of Central Oregon. These are the values I've lived with, and this is how I plan to be your legislator.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out and listening to us talk. I really appreciate the opportunity to get in front of you and tell you how I feel. And I think you got a good feeling of how I am, and I'm not going to... Taxes are the last thing I'm looking for. You know, I'm not going to raise your taxes. I don't like cap and trade. So that's where we differ. So I want you to make that clear that we are different when you go to the ballots. The Bend Bulletin just endorsed my campaign, and they brought it out saying that my opponent would like to tax, and I think revenue, everything was on the table. That was the quote. So it's very important that you go to the ballots and you read the voter pamphlet statement and you choose the best candidate. And I want to represent you in Salem, and I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for being here. Thanks, Katy, for hosting, and the chamber. I appreciate everyone being here and listening. It's really important that not only do we have frustration with our political system, but the fact that we're here and we are listening, and this is how we make the change that we want. I want to be Bend's next independent and inclusive representative, and I would appreciate your vote. I enjoyed being able to talk with you this evening and tell you my viewpoints. And if you have any questions or comments, or you're at home and you weren't here tonight, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I would love to meet with you or answer your questions. I think it's really, really important that we listen to our voters and we represent Central Oregon's needs. And I want to be your next voice that does that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry Helt, running for District 54, Eileen Kiley, and hello, there we go, Jack Zika for the House District 53. Thank you so much for running and for being willing to serve. And thanks to all of you for coming tonight. Sure appreciate you being here. Thank you and good night.